Hi, and welcome to another Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. This week, I will once again be joined by my conspiracy theorist and absolutely insane co host, Mr. Bob Greaves, who will be explaining to us the ways that that we can know that there's a reptilian race running the world by impersonating humans and primarily through controlling our thoughts with the chemtrails that are the chemicals put into the contrails of jets and then poisoning us with vaccines and GMOs and there's I'm sure plenty of other. I'll let him get to that though. Bob, how you doing today?
I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine, and it's so nice when atheists and scientists come together. One package.
Yeah, isn't it? Now they can have both, and they can also have you.
Yeah, so that works really well, I think.
Ah, so
So
last week we talked a fair amount about
continuing on
GMOs.
what we were doing last week, yeah.
This week, unfortunately, my wife didn't let me have the computer that has all of that research sitting in front of me.
Oh,
And I therefore have to go more off of memory. However, I think I cited most of my documentary evidence last time, and now it's more of a philosophical discussion about what we should be skeptical about and
sure.
how we should approach these things. So.
Did we ever really identify a definition for junk science?
We didn't, and I before we get into that, I wanted to sort of finish out the accusation, I guess, that I had at the end of the show. If you don't mind me prodding at you a little bit longer here, is at the end of the show, I had stated that your sharing of that video was a bad thing to do, not because you are skeptical of certain aspects of the GMO or the existence of GMOs, but because you are, for one, not skeptical of the particular things that she was discussing, or if you are, it's a mild and unresearched skepticism. And two, it is because her performance was one, it was a TEDx talk, and people associate that with TED Talks, which TEDx is a little bit different. But the other side is that you are a respected intellectual and a scientist, and you have people that will take your word on things like that, or take something that you shared like that to be something that you thoroughly researched. And I think that there's a level of responsibility that comes from your intellectual authority that you've neglected in that respect.
Okay, how do you know that I neglected it?
Because last week I talked to you more about it.
Okay, yeah.
I think that last week I spent a fair amount of time coming into very specific points about her particular argument, and we discussed it. And your essential,
I
I'm
noticed you
sorry,
left a few things out too.
what things
Well, first of
specifically?
all, he actually introduced her as a mom, and you neglected to mention what she did before she was a mom.
She neglected to mention what she did before she was a mom, and I tried
Well,
Googling her name and things and trying to find more about her.
I think you should go listen to that talk again because it began with her talking about what she used to do.
What did she do prior?
She used to work in the food industry.
Okay. And that's all the specifics that she made?
You know, she was a scientist.
A scientist in the food industry?
Yeah, yeah.
Did she mention what?
She was, she was more involved in some of the marketing of things, but I don't. Right, it's been a long time. I mean, I haven't even looked at that talk since I quoted it. What was that, 3 weeks ago? So I don't recall what she said, but she did introduce herself as somebody who had actually, been working in a position that was closer to that industry. And I can't recall whether she was a dietitian or well, I can't remember. what she was. But she, nonetheless, she was a person who had, gone to college and studied science and studied what she'd done from a scientific standpoint, and never really gave much thought to some of these other things. But anyway, I noticed that you had left that out because she introduced herself that way, just to begin with. But so maybe we should see if somebody else could find that and then let us know what it was she said.
Yeah, if we have any viewers that would have give us any help with that, I'm looking for my message to myself last time that contained a fair amount of this information, including her full name, because I don't remember that. I remember her name was Robin, spelled with a Y. But I'm going to quick find the link to your post so I can see that, and I will share that name because I tried finding her credentials. That is something that I researched and could not find it. Robin O'Brien is what it is. Right. And it's Robin with a Y.
Yeah, and she's spoken at TEDx a couple of times on different topics. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw, I mean, her credentials on her own website list her as author and concerned mom. That's where I took that from.
Oh, really?
That's,
yeah.
I don't know beyond that, but author and concerned mom was how she introduces herself. So I didn't think that was neglectful by any means for me to give her the same introduction.
Anyway, but anyhow, she mentioned some things that I understand that many scientists debunk. I understand that, but I find their debunking to be unscientific.
And just because their debunking is unscientific does not mean, even if I granted you that, the conclusion that I'm drawing here is just because their debunking, even if it was unscientific, does not therefore mean that her claim is scientific.
Oh, no, not at all. I wouldn't even say that. I wouldn't even want to imply that. However, that's one reason I asked you why we should define junk science. Could I offer you 2 definitions for junk science? Okay?
Please do.
Okay. One type of junk science is when people make various claims that they insist are actually based upon scientific methodologies when indeed they're not. The methodologies they may have used are not accepted in the scientific community as being reliable. That's junk science. Another form of junk science is when people use only reliable scientific methods, but don't do an honest inquiry into all of the variables that could truly be isolated so that they can present a very selected but totally scientifically accurate view of something. So that these are people who tell a partial story. They tell the part of the story that is absolutely scientifically reliable and that bolsters the side they are on, and they leave all the other stuff out. In fact, to be honest with you, I learned in strategies that is one of the best ways to pull the wool over other people's eyes, because the people who are less competent than you will start to pick up on the fact that there's data missing, things not discussed, issues not looked into, and they will, being undisciplined and unscientific as they are, they will come up with all kinds of wild and crazy things to say, and you can now just sit back and laugh at them, and you never have to ever really address the issues you left out. That is also junk science.
I agree and I disagree. I think that the failure to explore all of the possible options.
It's done deliberately to make money. So I'm saying that it's not just that. Oh, that could be. I mean, who can actually thoroughly look at everything? Nobody.
But I think there's 2 sides of that. I will agree that yes, it's absolutely true that failure to control for all of your variables, but to treat your results as though you had controlled for them is certainly bad science. Obviously, science is the process of attempting to control for as many variables as possible and isolate as few as possible, at least experimental science, correlative science, which is what she did. She was just trying to figure out if there was a correlation. She certainly did establish that there is a correlation, and that's perfectly reasonable. But then to go from correlation to causation is the conclusion that would need to be tested in an empirical fashion, and she didn't.
There are 5 reasons why a correlation might exist, and it's true. one has to really find ways of eliminating the other four before they insist on the fifth one they settle on.
Right, and that's where I'm saying that the argument I guess I'm trying to address with this one is the one that you brought up in other scientists could have debunked this or say the one about pig stomachs by simply redoing the experiment. And you're right that that is a way that they could do it, or they could test it again. But there's also something to be said with recognizing when an experiment is junk science. So simply reproducing it, I guess I disagreed with yours before fully contemplating it in my own mind. But so I will agree that yes, that is also junk science. But what is the purpose of reproducing junk science if we can recognize that things were not properly controlled for?
Replacing the methods with a better method. I mean, you don't just reproduce the experiment. If, for example, you mentioned that that the way she had identified inflammation in the stomach, or the way that the people in Australia, the study that she mentions, the way they had decided that inflammation existed was simply by measuring the thickness of the lining of the stomach.
No, they looked at the color, was how they did it.
I think they also looked at thickness too, but they didn't necessarily test for the would you say the histamines or some of the elements that would have indicated that there was also other inflammation present. Then the thing to do is if this is something that hadn't been done is to then to redo it, but by testing for those things that she had left out. And the other thing that would have had to been done is this: well, if this color was different, if the thickness was different, then it was different. Why? Let's answer that question, because it was different and it was statistically different. So there is some significance, even if she has the wrong correlation. There's got to be some sort of an explanation for what's going on here, and the difference.
The other part of the junk science conclusion there was that it was, the idea of it being statistically different was based on a subjective measure even beyond the color. There was also, they graded the inflammation by mild, moderate, and severe. And actually mild inflammation was lower in the GMO group. Moderate, I believe, was the same, and severe was higher, but the sample size was very small by the time we got to that point. I think it was 7 showed severe.
168 overall. Do you know what the confidence interval would be of that?
I don't. I'm
that would be
not enough of a statistician to be able to pull that out.
Confidence interval would be based on the overall population size that she used, not just the number within that population that turned out that way. And I haven't seen that, and so I haven't seen what the actual statistics are on that study. First of all, I would think it's important to recognize that just because I put something up on my page doesn't mean that I necessarily agree with everything that it said. But I do tell you this: I do not feel that the GMO industry or and the Scientific American. I'll tell you. Do you read Scientific American, by the way?
I do. I actually am a subscriber. I get it.
So you see it online, right? As well.
Right. Well, it's weird. There's subscriptions like I don't have an online subscription. I just have the written one, but I still see a fair amount because I like them on Facebook. But
yeah, you can still see it online anyway, even if you don't have a subscription.
Yeah, some of them they're restricted. It's weird. Yeah. But
anyway, then that that Scientific American has a lot of scientists who are critics of their articles and write their criticism of their articles online, trying to express what they feel is their bias, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They publish some of those at the beginning of each one as well from the regarding the previous.
Do you know? I mean, so you're familiar with where the Scientific American comes from? They're not just a science magazine.
I'm not that familiar with their history, but I do know that they're both a science, but also a public information distribution.
Very rah America.
Right. Well, I don't know if I'd necessarily say, I mean, rah America in the like patriotism side of it. Is that where you're?
Well, no. Well, more the pride of our technology, I think. But
I've not picked that up, but I guess okay. I'll grant that.
So what I'm saying is that because there are people on there that are some of them scientists even working in the fields in which some of the articles are printed, who are then objecting to some of the biases. There are many people who feel that even if they can't identify what it is, there seems to be some reason why the magazine repeatedly publishes articles that strike certain scientists who actually work in those fields the articles are related to as being somehow one-sided.
And you're right. I mean, we certainly need to recognize when things have bias. And there's no industry, no person is free of biases. But I think that
right.
what I listed off last time was a series of all kinds of major scientific communities from all over the world, from several different, I mean, even communities like Europe that are very strongly politically anti genetically modified organisms, and still their scientific community saying it's a political and economic hype that is stopping people from embracing these, that there's no good science that supports the conclusion that these are any more dangerous than regular food. And in fact, there's plenty of good science that supports the conclusion that it's beneficial to us for economic and health reasons.
I'm under the impression, and I could be wrong, that in Europe, the scientists have a far more conservative approach to this. They're not necessarily saying that, oh my God, this stuff is awful. They're just saying, we have a lot more to do before we understand just exactly what all the potential outcomes are going to be. And, once you get something into the gene pool, you'll never get it out. It's kind of like putting a naked photograph out on the internet. Sorry, it's out there. It's never.
I know. I've learned that lesson. I tell you what.
Yeah, it made me a star, but what can I say?
That's how I learned that lesson.
Oh, but when I became a star.
Moving on from that, as much as we can get that image out of our heads.
Go ahead.
I don't necessarily agree. I'm looking for now my.
While you're looking for that, let me just say this, and hopefully you can hear what I'm saying too. That my biggest problem with the GMO is not that I have an absolute belief that this stuff is really bad for you. My problem is that I do not feel that the people who are bringing it to us have earned the credibility to demonstrate that they actually do know all the things they need to know before they're moving forward with this. And there is so much damn money in it that, to me, that smells like a situation ripe for corruption.
Sure, but I think that you can also grant that there's plenty of money on the opposite side as well. On the organic industry is a huge multi-billion-dollar industry. The holistic health industry.
But compared to the other industry, they're paupers. And not only that, but when you take a look at the legal situation between, say, organic and non-organic, it is worse than racism. It is
sure, but. Yeah. But there's also, it's much harder to get people to believe things that are scientifically technical and that are a little bit scary. People are naturally rather xenophobic and resistant to change. And I think that.
Why does Tyson Chicken need to go to court to get some guy who raises open field chickens on his ranch and then slaughters them out in the open on a deck? Why do they have to go to court to try to get this guy to stop him from doing this, because they claim that he's doing it out in the open and there's all kinds of contamination, even though all the scientific evidence shows that the bacteria and parts per million on his chickens when he slaughters them out in the open doesn't even compare with the Tyson chicken you can take off the shelf in the grocery store. And I mean, it doesn't even come close. And yet they're pushing all their lawyers to do things. Why do they need to do that? And why do they need these laws that make it difficult for these people who are...
But you're talking about laws. I'm talking about the court of public opinion. Yeah, there's certainly I'm not going to argue that there's not influences in our legal system, and I personally, again, I am ardently anti-capitalistic. I think that it's a terrible way to run things, and we have an extremely corporatist, capitalist government here in the United States that runs all kinds of things in a very, very bad way. So you're not going to get an argument from me on that. But what I'm talking about is how easy it is in the court of public opinion to spread information that people intuitively want to take in. Actually, as a matter of fact, this was what spurred the topic, or one of the topics on the Cult of Honesty on Wednesday night, was my little rant on my Facebook page about finding a new page that had just started literally within the previous 2 weeks. And I need to find this again in my rant here because it drove me absolutely crazy. But the point is, it's like natural world revolution. I think is the, and it basically is a page that it shares some good advice. You know, a lot of image macros and things that have sort of a quick soundbite kind of a message. And some of those messages are great. It's like grow food, not lawns. That's one of their big ones. They share that quite a few times. I don't have a problem with that. I personally have a lawn, but it's way too shaded. I've tried to grow food, and it doesn't work. We've got giant trees around us. Doesn't work real well. But and there's also other things on there that are just absolute garbage. Like one that was talking about cinnamon and honey curing cancer. Now, the average person would look at that and say, well, that's not that particularly dangerous. I mean, of course, nobody's going to be insane enough to just try cinnamon and honey and reject, evidence-based medical cures. That would be a supplemental thing. But there's two sides of that. One is that there are people that do that, and I'm going to continue defaulting back to Steve Jobs. The reason a very likely reason he's dead today. He very likely would have survived had he not attempted to fight his cancer with strictly dietary changes for several months after he was diagnosed, and had he embraced evidence-based cures or treatments immediately. But the other side of it is that those people who do recover and embrace both have a tendency to attribute it to the things that they did differently, like the cinnamon and the honey, and they then are neglecting. It's similar to the confirmation bias related to prayer. Our prayers have been answered because we went through 3 months of chemotherapy and radiation. No, the cancer went away because of the chemo and the radiation. You also prayed, but had you not done the chemo and the radiation, you'd be dead. And that's
Mm-hmm.
I guess the point I'm getting to with this rant is that this page, it's Natural World Revolution, by the way, is the name of the page. I just found
natural world. They're talking about wanting to have a revolution to bring us back to a natural world. That's basically it.
I'd imagine so. They don't explain it too specifically in there, but there is I don't even know how many likes this page has at this point. So there's 12,000 people who like this page. 12,000 people now get this in their Facebook feed. When I wrote this post, it was September 11th, so Wednesday of this week. And it was, at that point, their page had 1,400 people that liked it, 1,300 people that liked it. And it was growing explosively. As a matter of fact, within the 20 minutes that I took to sort of gather some information and review the page, they had gotten an additional 150 new people to like this page, and people sharing this thing. Now they're at 12,000 since Wednesday. They're growing incredibly explosively, and they share some absolute garbage that gets shared virally and liked and commented on, and it's just this incredibly huge, explosive amount of misinformation getting out there because people like to see things that they sort of intuitively grasp. Whereas my page, Inspiring Doubt, is still under 1,000 likes after 2 years of being in production because I share things about skepticism, and I challenge beliefs, and I do things that people have to think about. And for example, look at the New Covenant group. and our audience versus the audience of what the club, that the 700 Club, and these other, or Joel Olstein, because they share feel good, warm messages, and people don't
Can I?
necessarily like to
That's,
think, and it
that
spreads.
that sounds to me a bit too much like sour grapes. I would say that you know um, these people, if junk science aside, um, they're saying things that speak to people that people relate to, and if I think that scientists have a particular flaw, it is they often lack social skills, people skills. They don't know how to connect. They're so fascinated with the science that they don't realize that there's ways they need to connect. This is why I think I love people like Neil Tyson and Steven Pinker. These and Michio Kaku is a bit of a celebrity more than a scientist, I think. I mean, not to put down his thinking. It's awesome, but some of these people are starting to approach the general public using general public methodologies.
That's
And
actually,
I'll
Christopher Maudy went to school to study that subject. It was the science communication, I believe, is what his master's degree is in. And
and so
finally, scientists are starting to catch on that that's how we
right.
kind of have to do these things, is these silly little sound bites.
So guess what? The problem here is not that, well, people are just, they're running to this and running to that. The problem is that scientists have exited themselves from the conversation. And when they come
I
back to the conversation, they don't really get. So the truth is this: you have a PR problem and you need to solve it. And you can. And to be honest with you, I think that we're going to be better off with good science than with junk science, definitely.
I
But
have to agree to some extent. Einstein, I believe it was, who said that if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. I tend to
I,
disagree to some extent.
you don't understand it well enough to actually make a difference for others. That's for sure. That's
Right. And that's, I think there's some things that are just difficult to explain unless people are willing to dedicate some time to understanding those things. The theory of evolution is one where it's much easier for people to say, no, Bible says Earth is 6,000 years old, and God, we are a special creation. God made everything among its kind, or along its kind, or however that they say that part's worded, than it is to spend the time to understand the theory of evolution. And
But what's amazing though? It's amazing to me to hear you say that, because I'll tell you what, I have only I can't tell you how many times I've actually heard a Christian argue in favor of creationism and a scientist argue in favor of the theory of evolution. But in all of those times, it is rare that I've ever heard a scientist explain the role of theory in science and discuss the relationship that it has with facts that need to be explained, so that they leave the people who are listening with the impression that these scientists don't have a damn clue what a theory is, and the people already have a feeling that they know what a theory is, and the truth is what the general population think of it as a theory is not what a scientist thinks of as a theory.
I've seen that brought up quite a few times. I mean, the "it's just a theory" accusation is brought up all the time.
Right, but
And
what I'm saying is then the scientists don't come back and explain what a theory is. And
I can't
I
say
don't
that you're absolutely wrong on that. That there's plenty of times that ball is dropped, but there's also plenty of times that ball is returned with some serious force.
I'm not saying that. I'm not trying to represent anything statistically overall. I'm just saying that in all the times I've been involved in those kind of conversations, I have rarely heard a scientist explain what a theory is. And when I have heard it explained what a theory is, to me, I thought that the point was devastatingly powerful. That
But even that is something that still takes a degree of initiation, I think. It takes,
can I
you
give you
can't do it in a 30-second soundbite. Even explain what a theory is. It may be 2-3 minutes, but not 30 seconds.
Okay, here, how about this? The word theory is a determinate word used by scientists for a very specific meaning. And it's also a word that is used by other kinds of people for other reasons. For example, a criminal detective comes up with a theory that he thinks he knows who done it. And when he has this theory, he then goes out looking for evidence to corroborate his theory. But that's the way the detective uses the word theory. Scientists, research scientists, do not use the word theory that way. Research scientists look for facts. They find facts and they go, huh, what explains these facts? And in science, there are no theories except theories that seek to explain facts that are already in evidence. That's a difference in the use of the word theory. And as a result, and I don't think that took me to all of 30 seconds, but I think that helps to bring a clearer sense of the way scientists use the word theory. Don't you think?
I agree, but I think you used some words like determinate in there that we
Hopefully, across the context. But the thing is this, that these are special words, and the truth is the general population uses the word theory to mean something that is a loosely corroborated idea that it's kind of like a suspicion.
It's a hunch. A theory is the term theory as it's generally used is best equated to hypothesis in science.
Correct.
That's
Yes.
and for them to say it's just a hypothesis would be false.
Correct.
Because evolution is not just a hypothesis.
And so that means that if you could just explain the language you're using a little bit better, when people think it's just a theory, they are saying, what they're really saying is this: it's just a hypothesis. Now, if it were just a hypothesis, they would have a point.
Absolutely. It would be a pretty devastating point, actually. That
calling it a theory, they think they have a point, and they don't realize, no, you don't have a point. It's pointless. In fact, the theory wouldn't exist if there weren't a ton of points. And by the way, I can say, when you gave us that presentation on the show after mine, on the place of evolution, I thought you did a fantastic job of clarifying all of the facts that come to us that make us say, you got to come up with an explanation for this. And I think you made an excellent argument for showing how evolution is a pretty damn good theory for explaining all of these interesting facts, including you mentioned some Brazilian frogs, I think it was, right? That actually went through a special mutation in captivity that they weren't even, that isn't the reason why they were even in captivity, but it happened there. So we actually witnessed speciation in front of our eyes. That's
I think I don't remember if that was a Brazilian. I think I may have been talking about the gray tree frog that's local to me. The tetraploid versus the diploid. But yes.
Well, what a powerful fact that is. And so, you know what? What I started doing with some other people as a result of that, people would say to me, evolution is just a theory. I would say, look, gravity is a fact. Gravity is a law. It's also a theory. But they're different. The fact of gravity is that it happens, and we measure how it happens. The law of gravity is our concept of the context in which gravity occurs. And the theory of gravity is our attempt to explain it.
There's two sides of this, though, is that you're right. There are ways to respond to specific points like that in a relatively concise manner. And especially if you word it in the correct way for that particular observer, but not any single observer is going to understand things like that.
You can never count on that for anything.
But,
in fact,
but that's the thing about the pseudoscience and the other side of this coin is they make intentionally vague statements that can be interpreted in all kinds of different fuzzy or warm fuzzies sort of ways, and that are really easy. The whole point of it is sort of a empowerment or even playing on fears. They're very much a form of rhetoric that is not based on the logical aspects of the way people work, but our emotional side. When people talk about this anti-GMO lobby.
So what you're telling me now is this. You're telling me that you've identified the problem. Now let me ask you, are you up to the challenge?
I hope so. That's my goal. But I guess the final point that I'm making, the reason I brought this up, Bob, is because you're saying the funding behind these massive corporations is much greater than the funding behind the
They don't have access
organic
to the
industry.
quality of scientists, of test labs. They do not have access to that. If they did, they would.
I'm not sure which like the anti-GMO. They don't have the access to the scientists to do
Have
these things.
access to the same level of quality. I mean, hey, if you go to a high school that has like 500 students, you'll probably have a football team that is okay. You go to a high school that has 6,000 students, just because of the numbers, by the time you've eliminated all the people who can't make it on the football team, you got a damn good football team, right?
Natural selection at work, right? Better
Exactly.
population size, it's more variety.
Right. Okay. So just given population size, these people do not have access to that kind of stuff, not just because of population, but other reasons. A lot of
I'm
these
not saying
GM,
about anything about their science, though. I mean, specifically them doing bad science and that, but how it's spread, the funding related to the PR and the information dissipation side of it is very different on their end because all they have to do is say, "Don't you think?" And
no, 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 no,
isn't
no,
it?
no, 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 no. That's not all they have to do. That's
eh,
all they can do.
They
Because I mean,
also can come up with
think
catchy headlines that misrepresent a science a thing that was done by somebody else. And most people don't actually read the science; they read the headline.
I would agree with you on that. So you got to kind of catch up to their savvy of politics. Now, think about it this way: if we were talking about, say, the Israelis and the Palestinians, and we're going to say, look at these Palestinians, they got suicide bombers. You know what would be a far better idea? What if they flew jet airplanes with real rockets in them and had real tanks and had all the same kind of modern machinery that we have? Instead, all they can do is blow themselves up, you know. But well, of course, that's all they can do because that's all they can do, you know.
Right?
And what I'm saying,
They don't have the
people
means.
who are there, who are on that side of it, they are doing what they can do, and they've discovered that they have a powerful voice in the general population, and that's about all they can do. They don't have access to the scientists and the labs to the same degree, and they also, when they do some of their studies, you might know this, many of their studies are actually illegal.
I'm not familiar with that, but I do know that there's a fair amount of
They are really
copyright and patent restrictions and things that are associated with how you can use these things. Again, I've got no problem arguing that the influence of wealthy capitalist organizations in the government is a very, very bad thing.
right.
But
So I'm saying let's come to the table. Let's be honest. Let's put it all out there. Let's let it be reviewed. Let's let it be studied by real scientists, really studying all of the issues that we think might be important, not just the ones that you find good enough to get it out there on the market.
that's the thing that I mentioned earlier is that I think there's certainly something to be said by looking at industry related scientists and industry funded scientists. As a matter of fact, this is one that I recently had to address with somebody who was talking about global warming. They talked about the was it auto no what is the Alberta Geological Association or something along those lines. I'm going off of memory here. This was a few months back, but discussing a study that came out about from this Alberta Association of geologists and engineers and a few other things that were very, very condemning of climate science. And under a little bit of scrutiny, you can see that the one Alberta, almost all of the scientists in that area work for the oil industry, and that right there. I mean, there's very few universities, and then the fact that they also included the engineers and a few other groups that aren't even research scientists. When you actually looked at the numbers of the people who put out this study or the people who were surveyed, it was a meta survey where they asked them their opinions
They
on
don't really
this.
they don't really
And
understand
well,
geological.
right, they were asking the engineers that work for oil industries what they think about global warming, and
Right.
that's a pretty biased sample.
Now, by the way, On this subject, do you find it ludicrous that there's even a controversy about global warming? I mean, think
Um,
about it. I mean, here's it. You set up various stations throughout the globe where you take the temperature. You take the temperature every hour. You then take the temperature every day, and you get a 365-day moving average. Then you follow that for several years. It either is going up or it's going down. There isn't any opinion in it.
right. This is fact. You're absolutely right. I mean, it's and most of it is not. People talk about things like the middle or medieval warm period and other things that are myth. There was no medieval warm period. There was an isolated climate aspect. I don't know how to word this, but there was a point in the medieval times when Greenland was in fact green, hence the name. When it was discovered by Europeans, it was named Greenland because it was farmed. But that
I
was a
thought
local thing. It was not
yeah,
global.
people to going there, but I maybe I thought it
It,
was.
there was it had more to do with ocean currents and air, large air currents like the Gulf Stream than anything else. So that yes, that area of the world was much warmer at that time, in much the way that the UK is entirely further north than any part of the continental United States. The furthest southern point is farther north than any part of the continental United States, and yet they are more moderate in the winter than much of the continental United States because of weather patterns and
That's why their grass is always greener. Damn it!
right, exactly, on the other side of the pond. Um, but I did, yes, yes, I guess that is a great point about the climate science, and there's a very, very nuanced one, or
Okay,
nuanced arguments that are associated with climate science.
find various places throughout the Earth that represent an appropriate random sampling of the Earth's temperature. Take them all, average them, take them daily, take them hourly, and then keep a 365-day running average or moving average. If you understand the math, if you understand the methodology, you're entirely outside of the area of opinion, and you've got a graph of global temperature.
Right.
And that's exactly
Well,
what it is.
but let's go into that for a moment longer about
As thorough as that in GMOs, but that would be awesome if we did. And I'd like to see the people who have the money to do it and have the patent permissions to do it to actually pursue that. In fact, I think that's what they're going to have to do before you can get rid of these kooks.
you might be right. But I did want to say on the subject of global warming, I saw a study released or a big article with a headline last week that talked about how the ice coverage in the Arctic right now is 60% greater than it was last year. And the conclusion, this was shared by Fox News and other sources, but the one that I found on Fox News, the conclusion being, therefore, global warming is a hoax, essentially. Like, this is not supported. But what they're neglecting to mention is that it's 60% greater than it was last year. And last year was a record-setting year where it was the lowest it has ever been in recorded history by huge amounts. And we are still, even though it was a 60% increase, still more than 2 standard deviations below the 30-year average. We're not even talking about a grand scheme, just the local average of 30 years, which would obviously even include last year. We're still 2 standard deviations below that. We're warming, and we're warming rapidly,
So
even though there's more ice this year.
upside on the downside of the roller coaster, and they say we're not really going downhill.
Right. This is that little hill at the bottom when you go down the big giant ramp, and they do that.
Yeah.
That's where we're at with the coverage. But we
So
are almost out of time here. And I wanted to, there's another infographic that I looked back up here that you had mentioned the non-American or the European places. And I've got this infographic that has statements from 10 of the international science organizations on crop biotechnology safety. From France, the French Academy of Science, all criticisms against GMOs can largely or be largely rejected on strictly scientific criteria. That one simply saying that most, and it's weird that it starts with all and then or includes largely, but it should basically say nearly every criticism that's out there is just bad science after examination.
You
Then
say
there's the United Kingdom. Foods derived from GM crops have been consumed by hundreds of millions of people across the world for more than 15 years with no reported ill effects or legal cases related to human health, despite many of the consumers coming from the most litigious countries, or the most litigious of countries, the USA. There's never been a court case,
successful
even.
court.
Right. Well, this one actually says no legal cases related to human health. It's not even successful. It just says no legal cases that have been even not even granted trial. Belgium says the main conclusion to be drawn from the efforts of more than 130 research projects covering a period of more than 25 years of research and involving more than 500 independent research groups is that biotechnology, and in particular GMOs, are no more risky than conventional plant breeding technologies.
Okay,
Germany's
before you go too far, let's talk about the legal situation. People have food allergies. People who have food allergies are supposed to not eat the foods they're allergic to. And if they do not have a legal standing.
right. Well, the only way that they would have a legal standing is if they ate food that they were unable to know that it contained it. Like if you go to Red Robin and order a salad and it has onions in it, when you ordered
And
them without onions.
there, the law, the case would have more to do with the liability of the restaurant, not related to the fact that the person was allergic to something is irrelevant.
Right. Well, but I mean, this is talking about any health consequences. There's not been a class action lawsuit. There's not been any
I
any
guess what I'm saying
lawsuits
is,
that are related to human health.
what I'm saying is that's making an implication of fact that isn't there.
No, it's simply making an assessment of what had. I mean, this is concluding based on again 15 years of no reported ill effects, and this is through all. I mean, the Belgium one is great with 130 research projects, more than 25 years of research involving more than 500 independent research groups. Is that biotechnology and in particular GMOs are no more risky than conventional plant breeding techniques. That one, it's a meta analysis of a huge amount of research over or spanning 25 years. And there's Germany, Brazil, China, India, Mexico, Third World Academy of the Sciences, the Royal Society and National Academy of the Sciences in the U.S., Switzerland, Australia, New Zealand, and three that are located just out of the United States on this list.
So, are you saying therefore, since GMOs are not allowed in certain countries, is it because the scientists just haven't had enough political influence there? Is that what you're saying? Because
Yes, I think that there's just as is always the case when it comes to politics, scientists don't have nearly as much of a voice on policy decisions as they ever really should. There's policy decisions tend to be determined far more by public opinion than by anything else. But we are out of time for today's show, and Joey is yelling at me via Skype messages. So I need to let this end on that. Maybe next week we can revisit this one. Maybe not. I guess we will figure out what the week feels like at that time. Stick around after this for The Unconventional Pastor with my co-host, Bob Greaves, and join us again next week for Inspiring Honesty, again, right after Clash Course, where I will be once again trouncing our producer, Joey Livingston, with whatever argument he decides to bring to the table. Thank you for joining us, and have a great week.
take care, Greg.